The bright morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of courtroom 302, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Sarah Mitchell stood quietly in line, her tablet computer clutched tightly against her dark blue business suit. At 32 years old, she had spent the last 5 years building her tech company from the ground up. But today, she was just another face in the crowded traffic court. The ancient ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, doing little to ease the stuffiness of the packed courtroom. Sarah checked her watch again, 9:45 a.m. In exactly 2 hours, she had the most important meeting of her career with potential investors who could help expand her healthcare AI technology to hospitals across the country. But first, she had to deal with this traffic ticket. Judge William Grayson sat high on his bench, his silver hair and black robes making him look like he had stepped out of a legal drama. At 65 years old, he had spent the last 20 years handling cases in this very courtroom. To him, it was just another Monday morning of traffic violations and minor offenses. Next case, his voice boomed through the courtroom, not even looking up from his papers. Citation number 47,582, illegal U-turn in a business district. Sarah stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. "Good morning, Your Honor," she said clearly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The future of her company, and the thousands of people her technology could help, depended on making it to that investor meeting on time. Judge Grayson finally looked up, his pale blue eyes scanning Sarah briefly before returning to the citation in front of him. His expression remained unchanged, a mask of indifference built from years of hearing every excuse in the book. "Ms. Mitchell," he read from the paper, "Officer Rodriguez reports that on Tuesday, March 15th, at 2:45 p.m., you made an illegal U-turn on Bradford Street, directly under a no U-turn sign. How do you plead?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I acknowledge making the turn, but there were exceptional circumstances that day." "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Grayson interrupted, his tone carrying the weariness of someone who had heard thousands of similar explanations. "A simple guilty or not guilty will suffice." The other people waiting in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. They had all seen this scene play out before: the stern judge, the attempted explanation, the inevitable fine. But what they didn't know, what Judge Grayson couldn't see from his high bench, was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just another face in his courtroom. "Guilty, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her fingers tightening around her tablet. Inside its memory were the presentations and proposals that could revolutionize early disease detection in underserved communities, the same communities that often filled this very courtroom. Judge Grayson scribbled something on his notepad. "Given the clear violation and the officer's report, I'm imposing a fine of $450. Pay the clerk on your way out. Next case." Sarah's heart sank. Not because of the fine, her company had recently secured its first round of funding, but because of the dismissive way her attempt to explain had been shut down. The judge hadn't even looked at her long enough to see the determination in her eyes or notice that her tablet displayed complex medical algorithms rather than social media feeds. As she turned to leave, Sarah caught a glimpse of the judge already focusing on the next case. He had no idea that in less than a week, their paths would cross again in a very different setting. He couldn't know that the woman he had just fined was about to give the keynote speech at the biggest tech conference in the city, or that her innovative healthcare AI system was already saving lives in pilot programs across 3 states. Sarah walked to the clerk's desk, her mind already shifting to the investor meeting ahead. This courtroom moment would become just another reminder of why her work mattered, why creating technology that could overcome human bias and preconceptions was so crucial. As she handed over her credit card to pay the fine, a small smile played across her lips. Sometimes the best motivation came from unexpected places, even from a traffic court on a Monday morning. 2 days after her court appearance, Sarah Mitchell sat in her modern downtown office, surrounded by walls of glass and the soft hum of computers. Her team of 15 engineers worked quietly at their standing desks, fine-tuning the AI algorithms that could spot early signs of disease in medical scans. The $450 fine from Judge Grayson still sat heavy in her mind, not for the money, but for what it represented. "Ms. Mitchell," her assistant Kevin poked his head through the door, "the hospital board members are ready for the video call." Sarah nodded, straightening her posture in front of her dual monitors. This was the meeting she had been rushing to when she made that fateful U-turn. Now, she had to make every second count. As the faces of 5 hospital administrators appeared on her screen, she pushed thoughts of the courtroom aside. Meanwhile, across town, Judge William Grayson sat in his private chambers, reviewing case files. His daughter Rachel, a software engineer at a major tech company, had been calling him all morning. He finally picked up his phone. "Dad," Rachel's excited voice came through. "You're still coming to the tech conference this weekend, right? I got you a VIP pass, and there's this amazing keynote speaker you have to see." The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Rachel, you know these tech things aren't really my area." "But Dad, this is different," Rachel insisted. "The speaker is doing incredible work with AI in healthcare. It could change how we detect diseases, especially in communities that can't afford expensive tests." Back in her office, Sarah was deep in her presentation to the hospital board. "Our AI system has already shown a 92% accuracy rate in detecting early-stage diseases," she explained, sharing her screen to show the latest test results. "This could save thousands of lives, especially in neighborhoods where people often wait too long to seek medical care because of the costs." The hospital administrators leaned forward in their video windows, clearly interested. One of them, Dr. Thompson, spoke up. "Ms. Mitchell, these results are impressive, but implementing new technology is expensive. How do you plan to make this affordable for smaller hospitals?" Sarah smiled, clicking to her next slide. This was where her passion truly showed. "That's exactly why we developed our sliding scale model. Larger hospitals pay full price, which helps subsidize the costs for smaller community clinics. Everyone deserves access to life-saving technology, regardless of their zip code or bank account." As Sarah continued her presentation, Judge Grayson was finally agreeing to attend the tech conference. "Fine, Rachel," he said to his daughter, "but only because you insist. These young tech people with their fancy computers." He trailed off, thinking about all the young professionals who passed through his courtroom, all believing their time was more valuable than others. The next few days flew by for Sarah. Her team was working overtime, perfecting their demonstration for the conference. She walked through their office late one evening, watching her engineers huddled over their computers, testing and retesting the AI system. "Our demo needs to be perfect," she told them, placing a fresh box of pizza on the break room table. "This conference could open doors to hospitals across the country. Think about all the lives we could impact." On Friday afternoon, as Judge Grayson left his courtroom, he glanced at the conference pamphlet Rachel had sent him. He didn't bother reading the speaker profiles or event details. In his mind, it would be just another gathering of young tech entrepreneurs who thought they could change the world with their computers and smartphones. Little did he know that in less than 24 hours, he would be sitting in the front row of the conference center, face to face with a familiar face from his courtroom. The woman he had dismissed so quickly was about to challenge everything he thought he knew about technology, justice, and his own deep-seated assumptions. Sarah spent Friday night rehearsing her keynote speech, unaware that one particular face in tomorrow's audience would bring her story full circle. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful changes come from unexpected connections, from moments that force us to see beyond our first impressions. Saturday morning arrived with a buzz of excitement at the City Convention Center. Hundreds of people streamed through the glass doors, their conference badges swinging from blue lanyards around their necks. Judge William Grayson stood in the lobby, feeling out of place in his casual sweater and slacks. He usually spent his weekends reading legal briefs in his home office. "Dad, you made it." Rachel rushed over to greet him, her own badge identifying her as a conference organizer. She was beaming with pride, having finally convinced her father to step into her world of technology and innovation. "The keynote starts in 30 minutes. We have seats right in the front row." Inside the main hall, Sarah Mitchell stood backstage, reviewing her presentation one last time on her tablet. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced with anticipation. 5 years of hard work, countless late nights, and endless coding sessions had led to this moment. Through the curtain, she could hear the growing murmur of the crowd as more people filed in. "Ms. Mitchell," a young event coordinator approached her, "we're expecting over 1,000 people in the audience. The governor's office sent a representative. We have executives from 12 major hospitals attending." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She thought about all the people who had doubted her along the way, the investors who had questioned whether she was experienced enough, The critics who said AI in healthcare was just a pipe dream, and even that judge who hadn't bothered to hear her story just days ago. Meanwhile, Judge Grayson settled into his front row seat, flipping through the conference program for the first time. Rachel had been talking nonstop about the keynote speaker, but he had only half listened. His eyes skimmed over the speaker's biography without reading the name, noting phrases like revolutionary healthcare technology and artificial intelligence innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome our keynote speaker, the founder and CEO of Health Tech AI Solutions, Sarah Mitchell. The audience erupted in applause as Sarah walked onto the stage. Her confidence showed in every step as she moved to the center, her red blazer standing out against the blue backdrop. Judge Grayson's casual clapping slowed, then stopped completely as recognition dawned on his face. His mouth fell slightly open. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Rachel whispered, noticing his strange reaction. Before he could answer, Sarah began speaking. 3 years ago, I lost my grandmother to a disease that could have been treated if it had been caught earlier. Her voice carried clearly through the hall. She lived in a neighborhood where advanced medical scanning was too expensive, where early detection often came too late. That's when I knew we had to change the system. Large screens behind her lit up with images showing her AI technology in action. Our system can analyze medical scans in seconds, detecting early signs of diseases that human eyes might miss. But more importantly, she paused, her eyes sweeping across the audience, briefly meeting Judge Grayson's stunned gaze. We've made it affordable for every hospital, every clinic, every community. Judge Grayson sat frozen in his seat as Sarah demonstrated her technology. He watched as she pulled up real case studies showing how her AI had already saved lives in 3 pilot programs. The woman he had dismissed so quickly in his courtroom was now commanding the attention of some of the most powerful people in the healthcare industry. The future of healthcare isn't just about creating new technology, Sarah continued, her passion evident in every word. It's about making sure that technology reaches everyone, regardless of their zip code, their income, or their background. Because in healthcare, just like in justice, she added with a subtle emphasis that made Judge Grayson shift uncomfortably in his seat, everyone deserves a fair chance. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, but for Judge Grayson, time seemed to stand still. Each word Sarah spoke, each achievement she shared, each problem she solved, hammered home the magnitude of his misjudgment. His daughter Rachel sat beside him, completely unaware of the profound irony unfolding in front of them. As the audience rose for a standing ovation at the end of Sarah's speech, Judge Grayson remained seated, the weight of his recent courthouse interaction with her pressing heavily on his conscience. He had made thousands of quick judgments from his bench, but never had one come back to challenge his perceptions quite like this. After her powerful keynote speech, Sarah Mitchell found herself surrounded by admirers and potential investors in the convention center's networking area. Hospital administrators eagerly handed her their business cards, while tech journalists waited patiently for a chance to ask questions. But through the crowd of well-wishers, she couldn't help noticing Judge Grayson still sitting in his front row seat, looking deep in thought. "Your AI system is remarkable," said Dr. James Chen, Chief of Medicine at City General Hospital, shaking Sarah's hand enthusiastically. "We've been looking for solutions like this for our community clinics. When can we schedule a detailed demonstration?" Sarah smiled warmly, but her mind was split between the important connections she was making and the judge's presence. The same judge who, just days ago, hadn't given her a moment to explain her circumstances, was now witnessing her life's work unfold before him. Rachel, still sitting beside her father, finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "Dad, what's wrong? You haven't said a word since the presentation started." She touched his arm gently, concerned by his unusual behavior. Judge Grayson turned to his daughter, his voice quiet. "I had her in my courtroom this week, Rachel. I fined her for making an illegal U-turn." He paused, the irony of the situation hitting him hard. She tried to explain something about an important meeting, but I didn't give her the chance. Back at the networking area, Sarah was explaining the technical details of her innovation to a group of interested investors. "Our AI doesn't just scan for one type of disease," she said, pulling up detailed images on her tablet. "It's designed to detect multiple conditions simultaneously, making it especially valuable for preventive care in underserved communities." One of the investors, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s, leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, what inspired you to focus on making this technology accessible to smaller clinics? You can make far more money targeting just the large hospital chains. Sarah's eyes brightened at the question. Because justice in healthcare isn't about profit margins, she replied, unconsciously echoing her earlier courtroom experience. It's about giving everyone a fair chance at early detection and treatment. My grandmother lived in a neighborhood where people often couldn't afford preventive care. Her story is not unique, but it can become less common. Meanwhile, Rachel was trying to process her father's revelation. Wait, you're saying you fined her for trying to get to an important meeting? Dad, she's been working on this project for years. Her technology could save thousands of lives. Judge Grayson felt the weight of his actions even more heavily. I see hundreds of cases every week, Rachel. I've gotten too efficient, too quick to judge without looking deeper. He watched as Sarah continued engaging with the crowd, her expertise and passion obvious to everyone. The conference organizers had set up a small stage area where Sarah was now demonstrating her AI system in real time. She pulled up anonymous medical scans on the large screen, showing how her technology could spot potential health issues in seconds. In this case, she explained, pointing to specific areas on the scan, our AI detected early signs of a treatable condition that might have been missed in a routine examination. Early detection means early treatment, and early treatment saves lives. Judge Grayson listened intently, now seeing Sarah in a completely different light. The woman he had dismissed so quickly in his courtroom was transforming the future of healthcare. He thought about how many other stories, how many other remarkable individuals he might have failed to truly see from his bench. As the demonstration concluded, another round of applause filled the room. Sarah thanked everyone and began packing up her presentation materials. She could feel Judge Grayson's eyes on her, but she focused on gathering her things. She knew their paths would cross again before the conference ended. There were too many unresolved questions, too much left unsaid. Rachel stood up, determination on her face. Dad, you need to talk to her. She gestured toward Sarah. This is your chance to make things right. Judge Grayson nodded slowly, knowing his daughter was right. In all his years on the bench, he had never felt more humbled or more aware of the importance of looking beyond first impressions. The question was, would Sarah Mitchell be willing to hear what he had to say? The lunch break at the tech conference brought a new wave of energy to the convention center's grand dining hall. Hundreds of attendees filled their plates from the buffet tables while discussing the morning's presentations. Sarah Mitchell sat at a VIP table near the front, barely touching her food as investors and hospital administrators continued to pitch ideas and possibilities. Judge Grayson stood in line for coffee, his mind replaying scenes from his courtroom over the past 20 years. How many other Sarah Mitchells had he failed to truly see? How many stories had he dismissed with a bang of his gavel? His coffee grew cold in his hands as he watched her from across the room. I really think you should talk to her, Rachel said, appearing beside him with her own cup of coffee. You've been staring at her table for the past 10 minutes. At Sarah's table, a hospital director was speaking enthusiastically about implementation plans. If we started with a pilot program in our emergency department, he began, but Sarah's attention was suddenly drawn to movement near the coffee station. She saw Judge Grayson and a young woman who looked like his daughter, deep in conversation. Excuse me, Sarah politely interrupted the hospital director. I need to step away for a moment. She stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked purposefully toward the coffee station. It was time to address the elephant in the room. Judge Grayson's face flushed slightly as he saw her approaching. Rachel, sensing the tension, squeezed her father's arm supportively and stepped away to give them privacy. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. I believe we've met before. The judge set his cold coffee down on a nearby table. Ms. Mitchell, he replied, his usual courtroom confidence notably absent. Your presentation was remarkable. I had no idea that the woman you fined without hearing her explanation was working on life-saving technology. Sarah completed his thought, her words direct but not unkind. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? We never know someone's full story when we make snap judgments. A few nearby attendees glanced their way, curious about the intensity of their conversation. Judge Grayson lowered his voice. You're absolutely right. I've spent years priding myself on being efficient, on moving through cases quickly. But efficiency shouldn't come at the cost of humanity. Sarah picked up a coffee cup, filling it slowly. You know, that morning in court, I was rushing to a meeting that helped secure funding for 3 new community clinics. That illegal U-turn, I made it because I saw an ambulance coming and needed to clear the way. The judge's face showed genuine surprise. I never gave you the chance to explain that. No, you didn't, Sarah agreed, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. But here's what's interesting. That experience reinforced exactly why my work is so important. Both in healthcare and in justice, we need systems that look beyond surface judgments, that take the time to see the whole picture. Around them, the lunch crowd began thinning as people headed to afternoon sessions. Rachel watched from a distance, proud of her father's willingness to face his mistakes. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Grayson started again, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench. I owe you an apology. Not just for the fine, but for not seeing you, really seeing you, as a person with a story worth hearing. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, considering his words. You know what's ironic? The AI system I've developed is designed to look deeper, to see patterns and possibilities that humans might miss at first glance. Maybe our legal system could use something similar. The judge nodded slowly, a new idea forming in his mind. Perhaps there's a way to bring this kind of technology into the justice system, not to replace human judgment, but to help us check our biases, to remind us to look deeper. For the first time since their courtroom encounter, Sarah smiled. Now that, Your Honor, sounds like a conversation worth having. She gestured toward an empty table nearby. Shall we discuss what that might look like? Rachel, watching from across the room, saw her father and Sarah sit down together, their body language changing from tense to engaged. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful changes start with a simple conversation and the willingness to see things differently. 2 weeks after the tech conference, Judge Grayson sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. He had just finished watching a video of himself from 5 years ago, handling cases with the same rapid-fire efficiency he had used with Sarah Mitchell. The contrast between his past behavior and his current understanding made him uncomfortable. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Dad, did you send that email to Ms. Mitchell about the pilot program? He smiled at his daughter's persistence. She had become incredibly invested in the idea that had formed during their conference conversation. Across town, in her company's headquarters, Sarah was presenting a new concept to her development team. The large screen behind her showed mock-ups of an AI system designed specifically for courtrooms. Imagine technology that could help judges and lawyers recognize patterns of bias in their own decisions, she explained, pointing to the detailed charts. Kevin, her assistant, knocked on the glass door. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Grayson's office just sent over the signed partnership proposal. The room buzzed with excitement. No one had expected a traffic court incident to lead to such an innovative collaboration. Sarah opened the email on her tablet, reading the judge's words carefully. After careful consideration, I am committed to implementing your AI system in my courtroom as a pilot program. It's time we brought the same level of technological innovation to justice that you brought to healthcare. The next morning, Judge Grayson stood before a packed courtroom, but this time was different. News cameras lined the back wall, and Sarah sat in the front row, her laptop open and ready. The judge cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. For 20 years, I presided over this court, believing that swift justice was good justice. He began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. But recent events have shown me that justice without understanding is no justice at all. Sarah watched as he explained the new pilot program to the assembled crowd. The AI system she had developed would analyze patterns in judicial decisions, helping to identify potential biases in sentencing, fines, and interactions. It was the first program of its kind in the country. Your Honor, a reporter called out, what made you decide to implement this system in your courtroom? Judge Grayson glanced at Sarah before answering. Sometimes the best lessons come from our mistakes. 2 weeks ago, I fined a woman without giving her a chance to explain her circumstances. That woman turned out to be one of our city's most innovative tech leaders, and she taught me that true justice requires us to look beyond our first impressions. The cameras turned to Sarah, who stood up gracefully. This partnership isn't about pointing fingers, she added. It's about using technology to help us all see our blind spots. The same AI principles that can detect early-stage diseases can help us detect early-stage bias in our justice system. Local news channels captured the moment as Judge Grayson and Sarah shook hands in front of the courtroom. The headlines would later read, "Traffic court incident leads to revolutionary justice reform." Later that afternoon, as technicians installed the new AI system in his courtroom, Judge Grayson watched Sarah directing her team. "Miss Mitchell," he called out, "I've been wondering something. After our encounter in traffic court, why did you agree to work with me on this project?" Sarah paused her work, turning to face him. "Because change doesn't happen by walking away from difficult conversations," she replied. "It happens when we're willing to learn from our mistakes and do better." Rachel, who had taken the day off to witness the installation, beamed with pride. Her father, known for his rigid adherence to rules, was now becoming known for something entirely different, his willingness to change. As the day drew to a close, Judge Grayson sat at his bench, looking at the newly installed monitors. Tomorrow, he would begin handling cases with this new system, this new perspective. On his desk lay a framed quote he had recently added. "Justice is not just about making decisions. It's about making sure those decisions are fair, unbiased, and truly see the person standing before us." 6 months into the pilot program, Judge Grayson's courtroom had become a model for judicial innovation. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a room that looked very different from half a year ago. Multiple screens displayed real-time AI analysis, and law students often filled the back rows, eagerly taking notes on this new approach to justice. Sarah sat in her usual spot near the window, laptop open, monitoring the system's performance. She had made it a habit to attend court sessions twice a week, fine-tuning the AI based on real-world observations. Today was special. Representatives from 5 other state courts had come to observe the program. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Grayson entered. The visitors straightened in their seats, noticing immediately that something was different about this courtroom. Instead of rushing through cases, the judge took time with each person who stood before him. A young man in a wrinkled suit approached the bench, charged with speeding. "Your Honor," he began nervously, "I was rushing to the hospital. My wife was in labor. 6 months ago, this might have been met with swift dismissal. But now," Judge Grayson glanced at the AI display, which showed patterns of similar cases and their outcomes. More importantly, it reminded him to look deeper. "Do you have any documentation from the hospital?" the judge asked kindly. The young man fumbled with his phone, pulling up a photo of himself holding his newborn daughter, time-stamped just hours after the ticket. Sarah watched as the AI logged the interaction, noting how the judge's response aligned with its fairness metrics. The visiting judges whispered among themselves, clearly impressed by the system's subtle but powerful influence. During the lunch break, Judge Grayson met with the visitors in his chambers. "In 6 months," he explained, showing them the statistics, "we've seen a 40% reduction in appeals and a 60% increase in positive feedback from those who appear in our court." Sarah joined them, pulling up more detailed analytics on her tablet. "The AI doesn't make decisions," she clarified. "It simply helps identify patterns and potential biases, allowing Judge Grayson to make more informed choices." One of the visiting judges, an older woman from the Southern District, leaned forward. "But doesn't this slow down the judicial process? We have hundreds of cases to process each day." "Actually," Judge Grayson responded, "while we spend a bit more time with each case, we've seen fewer repeated offenses and appeals, which saves time in the long run. More importantly, it's made justice more just." Later that afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected call. The governor's office wanted to expand the program statewide. As she shared the news with Judge Grayson, they both reflected on how far they'd come from that first traffic court encounter. "You know," Sarah said, reviewing the day's data, "our healthcare AI and this judicial system have something important in common. They both help people look past surface judgments to see deeper truths." Rachel, who had started working part-time with Sarah's company, rushed into the office with more news. "The National Judicial Review wants to feature our program in next month's issue," she announced excitedly. "They're calling it The Future of Fair Justice." Judge Grayson smiled, remembering how resistant he had been to change just 6 months ago. "Sometimes the best changes come from our biggest mistakes," he mused, watching another case begin on the monitors. A local high school had asked Sarah to speak about the program, and as she prepared her presentation that evening, she included a photo of that first traffic ticket, the one that had started it all. It served as a powerful reminder that innovation often comes from unexpected places. The day ended with a small celebration in the courthouse break room. Staff members, attorneys, and even regular visitors had noticed the positive changes in the atmosphere. The rigid, assembly line justice of the past had been replaced by something more human, more understanding. As Judge Grayson locked up his office, he paused to look at the framed traffic ticket on his wall, the one that had changed everything. Below it, he had added a new quote: "True justice sees with both the head and the heart." Sarah had helped him understand that technology, when used wisely, could help with both. 1 year after their first courtroom encounter, Sarah Mitchell stood on a much bigger stage, the National Justice and Technology Conference in Washington, D.C. The grand ballroom was packed with judges, lawyers, and tech leaders from across the country. In the front row sat Judge Grayson, now a changed man, with Rachel beside him. "A year ago," Sarah began, her voice carrying through the massive space, "I stood before a judge for making an illegal U-turn. Today, that same judge and I have transformed 12 courtrooms across our state." The audience leaned forward, captivated by the unlikely story. On the giant screens behind her, statistics told their success story: reduced bias in sentencing, increased public trust in the courts, and a 70% drop in appeals. But the numbers only told part of the story. Judge Grayson watched proudly as Sarah shared case after case of lives impacted by their program. His own transformation had become part of the training material for other judges learning to work with the AI system. But perhaps the most powerful change, Sarah continued, clicking to a new slide, has been in how we view justice itself. It's no longer about processing cases quickly. It's about seeing the whole person who stands before the bench. In the audience, several state governors and their teams took careful notes. 3 states had already signed contracts to implement Sarah's judicial AI system, and 12 more were in serious discussions. During the lunch break, Judge Grayson found himself surrounded by curious colleagues. "The hardest part," he told them honestly, "was admitting that after 20 years on the bench, I still had blind spots. But once you embrace the possibility of change, amazing things can happen." Rachel, who now headed the training department at Sarah's company, added, "The best part is watching judges realize they're not losing authority, they're gaining insight." Later that afternoon, Sarah unveiled their newest innovation, a mobile app that helped people understand their rights and prepare for court appearances. "Because justice shouldn't be a mystery," she explained, demonstrating the user-friendly interface. The conference's final event was a special ceremony. The National Association of Judges had created a new award, the Mitchell Grayson Innovation in Justice Award, celebrating initiatives that combine technology and compassion in the legal system. As Sarah and Judge Grayson stood together on stage to present the first award, she turned to him with a smile. "Should we tell them about the traffic ticket?" she whispered. "I think that ticket has earned its place in history," he replied quietly, remembering how his quick judgment had led to such unexpected change. The ceremony ended with a surprise announcement. The president had taken notice of their program's success and wanted to create a national task force on AI and justice reform. Both Sarah and Judge Grayson would serve as co-chairs. Back in their hometown the following week, they sat in the now familiar courtroom where it all began. The space looked different. Screens displayed AI analytics, and the wooden benches had been replaced with more comfortable seating. But the biggest change was in how people were treated. "You know," Sarah said, watching a young mother explain her situation to Judge Grayson with new confidence, "sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best changes." The judge nodded, remembering his own journey. "And sometimes," he added, "the people we're quickest to judge become our greatest teachers." That evening, as Sarah left the courthouse, she passed the spot where she'd made that fateful U-turn a year ago. The no U-turn sign was still there, but now it reminded her of something different: how life's wrong turns sometimes lead exactly where you need to go. The local paper ran a final story about their journey, with a headline that read, "From traffic stop to justice revolution, how one moment changed our courts forever." The article included a photo of Sarah and Judge Grayson standing together in his courtroom, both smiling at how far they'd come. As Judge Grayson prepared for another day in court, He looked at the AI displays that had become such an important part of his work. Each screen reminded him of a simple truth. Justice works best when technology and humanity work together. We take the time to look past our first impressions and see the full story of each person who stands before us.